Discipleship it wasn't just Jesus picking 12, and those are the only disciples that have ever been made, because they then increased the church and then increased the church. We went from 12 to billions that now call themselves Christian. That happened with a process.
I'm talking with Dennis Craig. He's the author of the book, Walking Together, which is a guide to discipleship, and a study guide, a number of other things that we'll discuss here as we're going on. And so we're going to get right down to business here and ask Dennis, why did you write this book? That's the
I'm sorry. I've been in ministry for a long, long time. I used to jokingly say I've been in there longer than I look, but I realized I now look like I've been in ministry as long as I have been, but since 22. And I kept looking around at a lot of the churches in my area, and it was even the church that I was a part of. And I hate the term seeker sensitive, but we've been such a seeker sensitive culture, and there's come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus, salvation, salvation, salvation. And yes, that's important. But salvation's not the end of the journey, it's the start. And so often we failed people once they come to know Jesus, and they're like, okay, I've met Jesus, I'm saved. Now what? What do I do now? And so I really wanted to kind of come up with a discipleship program, and I developed it for the church I was attending, and then it kind of morphed and turned into the book, just to kind of introduce newer Christians into establishing a foundation of turning their own salvation into helping them to disciple others and make disciples and help others find what they've found.
So you're looking at a process that does not just introduce the person to discipleship.
Yeah.
But the discipleship includes making more disciples.
Yeah, becoming a disciple and going out and telling others about Jesus. Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we have that introductory story that you have about the little girl going to the ocean and saying, what do you do about it? Which I think if you haven't grown up near the ocean, I'm about 20 miles from the coast here, so we think ocean a lot around here.
Yeah.
But if you've never been there, it can be quite an overwhelming thing, which is in a lot of ways is what the new person faces when they come into the church.
Exactly.
And you've called this the church's pretty big error, telling the generation how amazing it is to find Jesus to answer the ultimate question. Instead, now what? So in writing this book, you're highlighting that. Give us a little flavor of now what? You walk into the church.
Mm-hmm.
What are we looking? What does this look like?
To me, it's always been about finding somewhere that they can be comfortable and learn. It doesn't just stop with getting to know Jesus. Once you become saved and you establish yourself in that family, in that surrounding, there are steps you can take to build upon the thing. And the stuff that we've learned as little kids, when we sing in Vacation Bible School about the Bible, that's the book for me. And you're wanting them to get into the scripture, teach them how to pray. You may have people coming in that have never prayed before in their lives. You may have people that have never shared their story with another person or known how to give a testimony. And you may have someone that has never in their life cracked open a Bible ever. They may have that. They may now have spoken the name Jesus and then wanting to be saved, but have never got into the word. And so it's walking them step by step and teaching them that, discipleship it wasn't just Jesus picking 12, and those are the only disciples that have ever been made, because they then increased the church and then increased the church. We went from 12 to billions that now call themselves Christian. That happened with a process. And so, finding what those easy steps are to follow for a new believer, it can be harrowing. It can be very scary when you're first starting out. But even more so, it's those folks that, I was a member of a very large church in my local community that was incredibly good at bringing new people in and attracting non-believers and teaching them a genuine biblical message, an introduction to who Jesus was and why they were loved, why they were precious to him, why they were his sons and daughters, and how he wanted to save them from their sin. But then as soon as they made that acceptance, there were no discipleship classes, there were no small groups, there was no teaching of, okay, now let's take this salvation and build on it. That was never there. And I saw that and was burdened by it, like, what can we do? So that's where my heart is for new believers just starting out and finding that place, to go from, I'm now learning about Jesus. Now I'm establishing myself in a life of faith. Now let me find my friends that have also, or family members that have also been in that situation where they don't have a Jesus yet. Let me tell them my story. Let me help them get to where I am. I've got the greatest gift that's ever been given. Now let me try to give it to somebody else.
Okay, let's take our own direction from this. I know we talked about things that we were going to discuss, but I just, because this relates to my own experience with church, so I want to look at it. And the question here really comes in two parts, but they can be fairly substantial.
Okay.
First one is this: what in the and this would involve the process of discipleship. Do you do or say what is the action that a church could take to get people to share their faith? Because that's the first one you're talking about here. You're talking about them sharing their story of Jesus. Then we're also talking about how do we as a church disciple, and those two fit together. Those two fit together rather closely, I think. So, think about it from what this looks like. If I'm a church leader or a church pastor,
okay,
what am I going to do to get people past that initial barrier?
Okay, I need to make a space for it. It needs to become a priority in ministry. As a church, they will often fill their calendar with activity after activity after activity. With what we did was, if there was a night that we had youth ministry, we would also specifically choose that time. We're going to have men's Bible study, a women's Bible study, small group ministries. Establish a space where people can find somewhere to fit in, where they can feel comfortable, because it's once they feel comfortable in this new Christian world, they can start to open their mind and hear and listen to these new ideas and the new plans and the new ways of doing things, and kind of eschewing what they did before and pushing on to what it. Part of the church that I wrote this for, one of their areas of focus was recovery ministry, folks that had a lifetime of addiction that have come out of that. And one of their 12 steps is you literally need to break ties with all those things that you were a part of before. You have new people, new places, new things. And a lot of times for folks that are starting into Christian ministry, that's the scariest part. They have to leave a friend group. They have to leave a family group. They have to leave these things behind. We need to help them find a new family, a new group, a new place. So the first thing a church can do is give space for that. Have small groups planned out. Come up with a system of small groups where people can go and learn in a smaller atmosphere. They may not be as comfortable as a 300, 400, 500, person church service. But when they're only in groups of 12 or 20, it's much more comfortable. It's much more intimate. It's much more real. And you can get down to the nitty gritty of what those folks are going for. So the number one area for me, for any church, is provide a space for it. Give time. Make it a focus and a priority to go deeper than just that initial salvation experience.
So there'd be a focus, as we look at this, there'd be a focus on getting activities into the church calendar that are not just maintenance.
Yeah, not just, okay, once a month we're going to do our usual ice cream social. We're going to have our our swimming trip. We're going to have focusing very intently. I know you notice you're giggling, but yes. Well, I started in youth ministry. That was my first ministry jobs were in youth. And We established our calendar. Once a month, we do a fun activity. Once a month, we do a mission activity. Then 2 months is teaching. And, you kind of set things up and it becomes routine. But what I'm talking about is not the normal, those kind of maintenance routine activities. It's specifically focus on those new believers and giving them a place to fit and grow.
Okay, and focusing on the new believers is also going to be of value in building the discipleship over time of the older believers.
Yes, because I always say this, that when we first taught this class and the church we were in, we did have in our leadership and everything an established group, several people in that group with 20, 30 years in Christianity and the church and experience. And we made all of our leaders take this class, this 12-week class, because we said that there's nothing better than for the new believers to see and interact with the experience and the wisdom that's been gained through years of it. And yet for those 20, 30-year believers to see the new fire that is in those new believers. So many of us have been on, in churches, we've been on the board as long as there's been a board, and now we're bored. We lose the fire, that fresh fire that you can get in a church, and seeing new believers coming into this knowledge can excite you. And yes, it helps me to help us, disciple new believers, and it gives me a fire for it again. It makes me want to tell more people about it. It can hit all ages and all levels of experience.
Okay, now as you're at it, and I do a lot of work with small groups as well, do you have any comments to work with those people where the small group becomes inward looking? Yeah, I'm assuming that you probably encountered small groups.
You're talking about the Christian bubble, as I like to call it.
Yeah, you get them in there, and they can even be talking about discipleship, but they're never getting anybody. They're never reaching anybody outside of the.
Yep. We always made it an established goal in our discipleship ministry. We hit a certain week and said, I want you, now let's invite a friend to church this week. Let's make it the goal for week 6. I'm just randomly picking a number. Let's invite a person. Or this week, we're talking about giving our testimony. I want you to tell a family member, a friend, I don't care if they already know your story or not. You need to practice. So let's tell them our story. And then when we come back next week to talk, let's share our stories. What happened? Who did you tell, and what did they say, and how did they react, and what were your experiences? And, finding those areas. To become inward is very easy because it's safe, but it's only when it gets outside of that bubble that it's going to make a difference to anybody. I always tell people that there's a big conflict in the church these days when they're like, no Christian should, we need to stay away from those non-Christians, stay out of this place and stay out of that place. And they say to the, I was like, then how are those people ever going to see a difference? How are those people ever going to see Jesus? What if your presence there, it's the be in the world, not of the world. I can be around a group of people out to dinner. They may all be drinking, but I don't drink. And they may ask, well, why aren't you drinking? And I can say, it's funny you mentioned that. And we can have a conversation about it. It's a chance for a conversation. And so helping these new believers find those moments of conversation, listening to the Holy Spirit, when you're talking to a friend and that opening develops, and being ready to jump into that, letting them see the impact, even one time. Let them have an impact on one person one time. It will forever change the way they talk to folks and interact with them. That's all it takes. And even if let's say they didn't do the assignment, they didn't tell somebody, but another person in the group did, and they get to hear about the testimony of what happened as a result, that can help give the confidence and stoke the fire of that person.
So you would have people share testimony within the group, so that they both for practice and also for encouragement to one another.
Absolutely.
Let's step back here, and I know I'm going pushing into some interesting areas. These are the areas that interest me. Is okay? The person walks into your church, and we'll skip the part of how this is a new this is a new believer.
Sure.
Going to assume that somebody went ahead and, made that discovery or
Yeah.
adopted them or something like that. So you're starting with a new believer, and they're at the little girl's question. What do I do? Kind of give us a feel of a church's response that is going to bring that person into discipleship and
Yeah, right. I always am. I've always been a strong believer in. I was never the heads bowed, all eyes closed, no one looking around. If you've made a decision tonight, raise your hand. I've never been that guy, but I see the value in it, because a lot of folks, when they're making that decision, they're nervous about it. They don't want to be called out per se. But what I did when I used to be a youth minister, I did used to do that, because teenagers were a different ballpark than a lot of adults. But I would do that. I would say heads bowed, eyes closed, no one looking around. I would tell them what I would do. Instead of raising your hand, I would say, if you made a decision tonight, I said, my eyes are the only ones in this room open. I said, I want you to look me in the eyes. Just look me in the eyes. You don't have to say a thing. I'm not going to make you stand up and dance in front of the whole congregation. Just look at me. And I would make eye contact with every single one of those kids. And what I would do is purposefully, in that next 3 to 5 days, every single one of those kids would get visited by me with a Bible, just to tell them, hey, just want you to just start. And I would tell them, just start reading here. I even tell them where to start. But I would focus heavily, and I always do this, that if a new believer, and you have the knowledge that they're a new believer, we had specific people in the church that was just their heart too, is we would find those folks. And I would say, okay, this person's a new believer. Hey, I really want to introduce you to somebody. And I would introduce them to that person and have them make a connection. And I would have them invite them to the small group, invite them to a discipleship study, start sharing their story. Just to model it, so they would know they're not alone. They would know that, yes, other people have experienced what you're experienced and come through on the other side. It is safe. You're okay. What you've done is life changing, but it's not going to completely, change everything about your world. Yes, you can survive becoming a Christian. And not only can you survive it, you can thrive in it. And so I would always try to focus in on those moments, finding the people already in your congregation who have that gifting. And when those new believers come, attach them and say, hey, I just want you to meet this person. Maybe they recently had gone through this salvation experience. Maybe they were just a recent graduate of the discipleship class, whatever it is, where it's still fresh and still fire-filled, and that person can share their story, and to kind of give them a model and an example and an understanding.
Okay, so just one more thing. I'm going to turn direction and talk a little bit about using the book.
Okay.
What kind of shall say, proportion of the church's activities should have discipleship as a focus? And I'll just tell you where I'm doing. I was invited out to do. My wife and I were doing a seminar on prayer, which we did for some time, doing a weekend seminar on prayer in the church. And we got there, and my wife brings to me their bulletin, which was already prepared for the Sunday service. This was on Friday. And she said, do you notice anything odd about this? And I flipped through and I said, yeah, it's about the busiest church we've ever visited. And then she said, and what else? And I said, well, there's not a single thing here that has to do with reaching outside of this church. And so your entire church activity calendar was focused on member maintenance. So that's where my question is coming from. And the other piece of that is, when I first became a member of the United Methodist congregation, I asked the question, because they were using the term, mission focused or mission emphasis, and so on and so forth. And I was looking at the available budget materials, and it was about 2%. And they said, well, mission focused is about 5% of your budget is going to outreach, which was an interesting number to me. So I'm just hitting you, with those two as the basis.
Yeah.
what should what portion of what the church does should have discipleship? And by the way, you're talking about discipleship, that is also going to be developing outreach. What proportion?
I also grew up United Methodist. I was a district conference representative. I was on the conference youth council and all of that. Um, I always jokingly say that I'm a recovering Methodist, and it took me years to get all the splinters out because I sat on the fence a lot. But I say I tongue in cheek because I still love the Methodist Church and the foundation it gave me. But if you do a discipleship program right, in my opinion, outside of just your weekly Sunday, you've got your Sunday services of worship. I believe that if a church does it correctly, 60 to 70% of your activities should be based on a focus outside of your own church. Because, like, people try to separate evangelism and discipleship, but if a discipleship program is done correctly, it becomes your evangelism program. It takes care of itself. If your mission focus, if discipleship is done correctly, your mission focus is taken care of. If you're worried about finances, if you do your discipleship program correctly and people understand that their tithes are going to expand a kingdom, not just build the walls of your own church, it will take care of itself. I believe that anywhere from 60 to 70% of your focus should be on discipleship and outreach. That's just where my heart is. You do have to maintain relationships within your own church, but if you're doing small groups and discipleship in your own church, you're going to. One of the chapters of the book talks about that you're a part of the biggest family that's ever been. You're now a part of that family. You take care of your family. You're concerned about your family. And all the other stuff takes care of itself. This book has a simple focus: love God, love people. If you do those two things, everything else takes care of itself. You love God by worshiping him. You love people by taking that message and expanding a kingdom. If those two things happen, everything else will take care of itself.
Okay, let's change the focus just a little bit.
Sure.
Not very much.
Okay.
I just want to at least a couple of questions bringing us to a conclusion.
Sure.
Specifically, if somebody in a church is thinking about a discipleship program and they're looking at your book.
Yes.
And for our audience, there'll be links and book cover picture and so
Okay,
on.
sure.
We'll be showing on the video at this point so that you can contact Energion Publications to get more information about the book. But let's say you're considering looking at this book. What would be the use that you would make of the book? How would you go into it using this to establish and build a discipleship program?
Well, a lot of folks, just with the now what of salvation, a lot of folks are like, okay, how do I do this? These steps are not hard to follow. I think my favorite part about this book is reading the chapters leads to conversations. It easily, even without, I put end of chapter questions in each part, but even without them, what I found is when we led the discussions, the people would read the chapters before they came. We would come together for our weekly meeting, and people would come in already with questions and things to talk about and what to do. And it kind of just grew from there. If I was a church starting this new discipleship program, and the first thing you need to do are find, like I said, you find teachers that this is their heart. Not the ones that, well, we've always been the Sunday school teacher, so it's just I'm an educator, which means I should be able to be good at this. No, that's not it. You have to have a heart for people and a desire to see them come to a better relationship with Christ and then go and make disciples. If that's not your heart, you don't want to lead this. So choosing the right leaders is a great way to start. But yeah, I could, this would be a great place to plug and say, I think you should buy copy this book for every member of your congregation. It'll just give them a heart for it. But I mean, if you wanted to, that's fine, but you don't have to. But if you when you're reading that section, is to really get into the discussion of it. It's set up for 12 weeks. When we did this, the chapter on prayer, it took us 3 weeks to get through it, because that's such a vital, important part of discipleship, is that the importance of prayer and learning what prayer does and is, and establishing a prayer relationship with God. That took a long time to get through, because you unpack it as you go. But using this book is simply a tool. That's all it is. It's a guidebook. It's not the end all be all. Find what works for your congregation. Maybe you do have a church that is already very prayer focused, but you need more focus on the aspect of giving, or the aspect of, if a big conflict in your church then is spiritual gifts versus spiritual fruits, whatever it is, find those areas to focus in on. Establish a way of identifying new believers. Pick your leaders out carefully. Start with small conversations. Start with your leadership team. Work this study with your leadership team. A great way, the youth program, make all of the youth leaders go through this. If you have a young adult ministry, college age, make them go through it, so they can establish themselves in discipleship as they're leading their individual ministries. And then they can get excited about it, and it'll grow organically from there.
I'll point out on that. I know you talk, but hesitate for a moment about saying, buy everybody a copy of the book.
Yeah.
And as the publisher, I mean, I understand that in one sense. In the other sense, what I'm going to add to that is very simply, Energeon Publications, if you're buying direct from us, we put a very strong, we put serious quantity discounts in order to help churches use the materials that we publish in quantity. And so, we'll put, if you go follow the link that I'll have up here, you'll be able to find out what the quantity discounts are for the book.
Yeah.
So you can get a number of them for use in your congregation, and you don't have it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to have, good materials in everybody's hands. But even though I'm a publisher, I want to really underline what you said about identifying the people. The First United Methodist Church I was a member of handed me a 6 or 7 pages of surveys to find out what I did.
Spiritual gift inventory. I got so sick of those 3 words. Oh my gosh.
This one wasn't actually a spiritual gifts inventory. It was, although I've been hit with that one too.
Yeah.
But the one I'm talking about was simply various ministries of the church, and the church had this enormous number of ministries. And where do you want to work? And the thing about it is, at the point where they handed that to me, if I had grown up in churches, because I grew up in another denomination, if I had grown up in churches, I wouldn't have had any idea what most of those ministries were.
Yeah.
So I'm saying all of this not really to ask you a question, but simply to underline what you were already saying about, you need to talk to people, you need to identify what people are doing. And what I've found in teaching, because I wrote a book on identifying spiritual gifts that says nasty things about spiritual gifts inventories.
Mm-hmm.
Although I put a short inventory of my own in there with the stated purpose of getting you off the track.
Yeah.
But the point being that in teaching, I've always observed that asking other people in the room to identify the spiritual gifts of people that they know went a lot further than telling people to please announce your own spiritual gift.
Yeah.
And that's why I underline what you said. Go ahead.
And I've been blessed that, locally we had one specific church, and I have a relationship with the pastor. She's a very good friend of mine, but I don't attend their congregation even. And when the book was first was first published, I took, one of my copies and just took it over. I said, I just wanted to share this with you. I think she ended up ordering 10 or 20 copies that she uses with counseling people in her church. And when couples kind of, what's funny is one of my very good friends, her and her husband have been meeting with Pastor Janet there at the church and just meeting and talking everything. And she comes to me, she goes, so guess what the next book is that we've been assigned to read together? And I'm like, what? She goes, yours. I'm like, oh, okay. And it makes me laugh that, there are some ideas in the book that some people consider controversial, like, and, in denominationalism, some denominations, they don't deal with manifestations or gifts of the Spirit, spiritual warfare, that sort of thing. And so that may not be an area they're comfortable in teaching with a group or congregation. But the way this book works out, you don't have to. If you just want to teach about prayer, presence, gift, service, I borrowed that straight from United Methodist Church. When I was growing up, that was a big focus for a while, because those 4 areas put faith in action. It really does help in discipleship. But when I'd say tongue in cheek, but for an entire congregation to buy a book that can honestly give them a deeper insight to something, it's not just a plug for me, because I didn't write this book. I didn't write this book to make a profit. I wrote this book because I saw a need in the church. My serious and desire is what I said is I want to glorify God and edify the body. I want to see this kingdom grow. And so I think this book can help. I think it'll establish a fire in people to want to make disciples. That's the greatest gift that this book can give me.
Well, I would say to our viewers that this book is not, how shall I say, on the far extremes of any of these things that you're talking about. You introduce some concepts in there, and it would really be well for people to be aware of that.
Yep.
And even to be aware of the fact that different denominations take some different views, as well as different independent congregations.
Yep.
So that is a value in itself. So the book is Walking Together, and we has a nifty green cover with a a nice picture of the stepping stones on it.
Oh yes.
So we'll have a picture there for you to look at, but also make sure to contact me at Energion Publications, and we'll be happy to discuss the book with you and the needs for your small group or your congregation as a whole, and how we can get the book into your hands.
And now, the fun part is, and Henry can tell you that in the book itself, I actually, in my introduction conclusion, I put my personal email in there for anybody, any church leader, any person that does this study that ever has deeper questions that maybe they didn't get an answer to. I encourage you, shoot me an email. I would love to have a conversation with you about this book and about why I wrote it, about the chapters, the details. Please, at any point, get a hold of me. I would love it.
Okay, well, you'll have both options to get with me as the publisher, get with Dennis as the author. And I know a lot of things that happen in churches. They're wondering, is this book going to work for us? If you're considering it for your church or something like that, I'll send you an evaluation copy. You can look at and decide and just look at the book, or have these conversations with either of us about the book. So that's the salesmanship part of this whole thing. Yeah. I say that's an occupational hazard. I'm very much committed to both outreach and discipleship myself. And the book doesn't do any outreach if I don't sell it. So there we go. Now, before we conclude, I'm working on another book that you wrote. Why don't you just give people a word on what's coming up?
I'm so excited. This book was a huge labor of love. I went through a very large blow up in my church world that really impacted me spiritually, and I could not get out of Matthew 5-7. I tried reading other parts of the Bible. God kept putting me back in that section. And it all of a sudden clicked for me one day. So now when new believers come to me and say, where should I start reading the Bible? I used to say the book of John, because it's more very relational, very image-based, or the book of James or Romans, because it's practical. For the rest of my life, I will say Matthew 5-7, because the Sermon on the Mount is literally, if that's all that Jesus ever taught, and everything is in there, that is the entire picture of what he wants for his kingdom on this earth. And it really just hit me over and over, the Beatitudes and the salt and light and all of these different images and what God wants. And it really just made me, hardcore dive into a study into the Beatitudes. So it's all about Matthew 5-7. It is called Love God, Love People. It's a roadmap to Christian living. And it really just gives you a very plain spoken take on things. It's about 30, I would say, about 70% Bible study, 30% commentary, or maybe it's 30% Bible study, 70% commentary, but it's just my own thoughts and instincts on what God is trying to tell the church today, tell the believer today, on how to make every day a focus for their Christian life. It really puts things, as Rich Mullins used to say, it puts the cookies on the bottom shelf. It's very easy to understand, very relatable. I am so excited. As much as I loved Walking Together and the book that I wrote, I love this book. I loved writing it. It flowed out. The last 2/3 of it flowed out of me like water. It took me less than 2 weeks to write the whole second 2/3 of this book. It was just awesome. It was so much fun.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I was interested because it was, as a matter of fact, this will be the second book I'm publishing on the whole of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7.
Okay.
I have 2 already out about the Lord's Prayer.
Okay.
So within that context, which tells you a little bit about what I feel about it.
Yeah.
When you, as a small publisher, you take a second book on a subject that you've already published on, you both have to think that is an important subject, and you have to think that we're getting more about it now. And so the answer to that is, I think you're right. I think it's important. And I think you've got a take on it that's going to be valuable. And we can always keep learning.
I appreciate that, Henry. Thank you.
The Matthew 5-7, I don't care how many times you read and study that, you're going to find something new.
Every single time. I didn't read a different part of the Bible for 8 months. It's straight. And it really brought my heart back to the Father. It was amazing.
Okay, and if you want to get notified when this next book is shipping, when it's available for pre-order, and when it's shipping, you'll have an email address. You can just email the address on the screen and let me know, and we'll send you a notification. When you send me request a notification about a particular book, you do not get added to an email list other than the list for that one notification. You'll get notified of that book, and that's the only thing you'll hear from us, unless you subscribe to newsletters or something else. So I've been talking with Dennis Craig about an already published book, Walking Together, Discipleship, an active, practical approach to discipleship, and then his forthcoming book, Loving God and Loving People, on the Sermon on the Mount, which is kind of the blueprint for Christian life. So thank you, Dennis.
And Henry, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.